If you saw the musical Hamilton, may recall there's a scene at the end after Hamilton has been killed, where the Aaron Burr character has a soliloquy, and he says, I don't know the exact words, something to the effect that he will always be the villain now. And well, my dog's barking in the back, so sorry about that. But I want to suggest to you today, give you a different interpretation, that Burr is not the villain, and the fancy word we like to use nowadays, the narrative. The Hamilton side has always controlled the narrative, but I want to give you a different interpretation today, and hope that you will find it persuasive. So another thing, just to point out, many people think that because an event has happened in history, that it was somehow inevitable. It's not. It was not. People have choices all along the way, and those choices have consequences. And we will see that today. To put it in time, the duel between Burr and Hamilton, resulting in Hamilton's death, took place on July 11th, 1804 at Weehawken, New Jersey. First, let me say a little bit about dueling in general before we get to the Burr-Hamilton particulars. Dueling had very strict rules. It was almost like a sport in a sense. There's no governing body like Major League Baseball or the NFL. So enforcement of the rules is sort of left to individuals, but there's a very strict code. It was called the Code Duello, D-U-E-L-L-O, and it was written down in Ireland in 1772. Depending on what source you look at, there are either 25 or 26 rules. They're quite detailed and try to cover all contingencies. These rules are essentially adopted in America, though in a somewhat less detailed fashion. Okay. Dueling is only for gentlemen. You never would issue a challenge or accept a challenge from someone of a low social class. Okay. The purpose of dueling is to defend one's honor. It was thought then that any kind of, certainly a public figure or even a private individual, could not let a public insult go unanswered. What do we mean by a public insult? Something that either appeared in the press or was said in the hearing of witnesses. To let an insult go unanswered would show that either the insult was true, you were acknowledging the insult was true, or that you were a coward and afraid to defend your honor. For a public figure, either one of those would be a career killer. But contrary to what most people think, the purpose of dueling is not to kill people, kill the other party. Most duels did not result in death. The purpose is to gain an apology. I think it may be helpful to think of dueling not as the specific event where guns are actually fired, but think of it as a process from the insult until whatever the conclusion is. But I do want to stress this. The purpose is to get the apology. Ideally, duels shouldn't even take place, but we will get back to that. An apology could be issued at any time right up until the actual firing. So one can always change one's mind right at the last second. All negotiations were handled by people who were known as seconds. The second is, I think of it kind of as a combination of best man at a wedding and a lawyer. But all negotiations between the challenger and the challenged once the challenge has been formalized and accepted, all negotiations are handled by the seconds. And just one other rule that's pertinent here, and we'll get back to later, the challenged party supplies the weapons. So having said that, let's look at what's going on with Burr and Hamilton. Without getting into a long backstory, remember we're in 1804. Aaron Burr is still the vice president of the United States. But he knows that Jefferson, who's the president, is not going to pick him again for VP when he runs for second term. So Burr decides to run for governor of New York. He runs as an independent and loses the election. In April 23rd, 1804, a copy of a letter from a man named, excuse me, Dr. Charles Cooper, to Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, who's very rich and a major political power in New York State. This letter from Cooper to Schuyler appears in a newspaper called the Albany Register. It's not clear who leaked the letter, because it's a private letter. It's not clear who leaked it to the paper. Some historians even think Cooper may have leaked it himself. That's not really pertinent to our situation, but I'm just saying it was leaked to the paper. In the letter, Cooper tells Schuyler about a dinner party he had just attended where Hamilton had been present. Again, just to refresh your memory, Hamilton was no longer a public official. He had long since retired as Secretary of the Treasury. He's now a private citizen, a lawyer in New York City, but he remains very active behind the scenes as a power broker within the Federalist Party in New York State. Cooper says that Hamilton at this dinner party had said that Aaron Burr was, quote, a dangerous man not to be trusted with the reins of government. It's not until mid-June, 2 months later, that Burr is shown a copy of this newspaper. Interestingly, what offends Burr is not any political comments Hamilton made, but this sentence of Cooper's. I could detail to you a still more despicable opinion which General Hamilton has expressed of Mr. Burr. The rest of the comments could be dismissed. I'm calling it political trash talk, borrowing a phrase I guess that originated in sports, I don't know. But it kind of it describes well what Hamilton does. He's a major trash talker. But the word despicable is what really sets Burr off and makes him angry. This was a personal insult about a person's character, and in that day was even considered slanderous. What really upsets Burr is the statement, still more despicable. Now, we don't know what it was Hamilton actually said, but that was the phrase Cooper used to describe it, still more despicable. Burr feels he can't just let this go because it's appeared in public in the newspaper, and to not answer an insult was to suggest it's true. Hamilton, let me give you a statistic I think is very significant. Between 1779, which is of course still during the Revolutionary War, and 1804, Hamilton was involved in 11 different dueling situations as either the challenger or the challenged. Now, not all these actually take place. Sometimes he issues apologies, but I think that's pretty significant. Hamilton has a reputation of insulting people, political enemies, in a way that goes beyond politics, in a way that's very personal. Be involved in 11 different duels. I think that tells you something. Aaron Burr was involved in only one. and it was in 1799 with Hamilton's brother-in-law, John Church. And it was sort of even though the bullet went through Burr's coat, that particular duel is kind of a comedy of errors, and Church apologizes and they walk off together, friends, and laughing at all the things that went wrong. So as I say, Hamilton has a reputation. And Hamilton has been talking against Burr for years, at least going back to 1792 that we can document. Now, some of it's political, but a lot of it is personal. And many people, we can maybe talk about this later, people that know, contemporaries that know them both, are always a little puzzled by this as to why Hamilton hates Burr so much. And I think hatred is the right word. And no one really knows. It's certainly something Hamilton is, so I'm going to use adjectives, irrational and obsessive. Hatred of Burr that goes far beyond politics, and nobody really knows why. In any case, I learned something very interesting, and let me just mention about the sources. We have letters between Hamilton and Burr. They don't really tell us that much. What I found was a really useful source that I'm getting a lot of this material from was the accounts left after the duel by the two seconds, Burr's second, William Van Ness, and Hamilton's second, Nathaniel Pendleton, both of whom were lawyers and judges. And they left very detailed accounts of what went on through the whole process. One thing we learn is, and Burr cites this in two different in a letter to a friend, as well as what he told Van Ness. And I think this is significant, that on previous occasions, a number of insults had come Burr's way, reports of insults from Hamilton. Burr tells Van Ness, and Van Ness relays this to Hamilton. Burr tells Van Ness that a lot of these he just let go because, quote, the statements which had been made to me did not appear sufficiently authentic to justify the measure. In other words, a lot of things are coming by hearsay, maybe second, third, fourth-hand accounts of somebody saying, I heard from so-and-so who heard from so-and-so, what Hamilton said about you. Burr lets those go, even if they are insulting, because he thinks that it's not, by that point, it's hearsay, and he lets it go. Another thing we learned from Burr in a letter to a friend, Charles Biddle, after the duel, as well as telling Van Ness, there were at least two specific occasions prior to this where Hamilton issued very personal insults against Burr that were verified by eyewitnesses, and that Hamilton, realizing he might have gone too far, actually approaches Burr, takes the initiative to approach Burr to apologize. Now, we don't know when these things happened or what the actual insults were, but Burr says on two previous occasions, Hamilton had come to him to apologize, and Burr had accepted the apology. And as Burr says, from delicacy to him and from a sincere desire for peace, I have never mentioned these circumstances. The reason I think this is significant is that when Burr, I'll get to it in a minute, Burr first writes Hamilton asking for an explanation. His past history with Hamilton tells Burr that Hamilton will apologize. I think Burr goes into this thinking Hamilton will apologize this time too. I don't believe that Burr has any desire to kill him. I don't think Burr even has any desire or even expectation that this will even lead to a meeting on the dueling field. Burr thinks, understandably, based on Hamilton's past history, that Hamilton will apologize again. Okay. Burr sends Hamilton an initial letter delivered by Van Ness with a copy of the Cooper letter that appeared in the newspaper, asking Hamilton to either apologize or deny the still more despicable remark. I want to stress this. This is all Burr wants, a denial or an apology. This duel should have ended right here. There was no reason for this to go any further. All Hamilton has to do is either apologize, say, yeah, I said this, I got carried away, I'm very sorry, or deny he said it in a careful way, because he can't accuse Dr. Cooper of being a liar either. But he can easily say, you know, I don't think I said anything insulting to you. It's possible Dr. Cooper misheard me or misunderstood me. That would have been enough to end it right there. But for reasons unknown, Hamilton will not do that. He waits 2 days, so he really thinks it over, what he's going to say in reply. And his reply is kind of strange. I've heard people use that modern overused term snarky. It definitely is. Hamilton says he can't distinguish between despicable and more despicable. And so he can't be responsible for how Dr. Cooper may have interpreted his remarks, and Burr will have to be more specific. Burr is not satisfied with this response, and he writes back another one. Burr also takes his time, 2 days, to think over what he's going to say. Burr responds, the question is not whether he, Dr. Cooper, has understood the word or used it correctly, but whether you have authorized this application, either directly or by uttering expressions or opinions derogatory to my honor. Van Ness also tells us that he tells Hamilton at this point what I think is a very significant concession on Burr's part. Van Ness says to Hamilton, you know, Burr wants an apology or a denial, but there's a third option now. Burr will concede a third option to Hamilton, that Hamilton, if Hamilton would just say he has no recollection of saying anything that night, that would justify the interpretation put on Cooper, Burr will accept that. In other words, Hamilton just has to say, I don't recall, and Burr is willing to accept that. Hamilton won't do it, and he tells Van Ness, quote, Colonel Burr must pursue such course as he should deem most proper. That's a fancy way of saying if Burr doesn't like it, he knows what he can do, that is, issue a challenge. At this point, Hamilton calls on his friend, Judge Pendleton, to be his second. From this point on, all negotiation is done between Van Ness and Pendleton. Burr and Hamilton do not communicate directly with each other. They only communicate through their seconds. So let me stress this point too. We think of seconds as their job is to make all the preparations for the duel. That's true, but only if it gets to that point. The number one goal of the seconds is to prevent the duel by negotiating an apology or denial, or in this case, even getting Hamilton to say, I don't remember. Both Van Ness and Pendleton gave accounts after the duel, very detailed accounts that appeared in the press. Interestingly, they both back up each other, and I think these accounts are very persuasive because they don't disagree with each other, right? As to what led up to the duel and what happened with their negotiations. Several more days elapse where the 2 seconds are very busy. And the bottom line is Hamilton, again, we don't know why, will not concede any of these points. He will not apologize. He will not deny that he said anything insulting, personally insulting, and he won't even say that he doesn't recall. So we're kind of at an impasse. But Van Ness tells us another interesting thing in his account. And I think this shows a very different philosophy that Burr and Hamilton have over insults and when it's appropriate to insult someone. Hamilton uses as his all-purpose excuse, and believe me, he has insulted many more people than just Aaron Burr. Hamilton's all-purpose excuse is we have political differences, and political differences excuse saying anything. He doesn't put it in quite those blunt words, but that's what he says. That's always his excuse. Did I insult you? Oh, you know, we're rivals, we're political rivals. We have different philosophies of government. And hey, if you're in politics, you have to expect that. So for Hamilton, political rivalry, differences of political opinion, that's his all-purpose excuse. Burr has a very different view. In fact, it's just the opposite. And Van Ness explains this to Hamilton to no avail, of course, but it's very interesting. Burr's view is just the opposite. Burr says that if people are political rivals or have political differences, all the more reason you should treat them with respect and that they will reciprocate. And interestingly, Burr mentions 2 names to Van Ness. Says, tell Hamilton this. 2 political opponents of Burr with whom he has very cordial relations. You'll probably recognize both names, John Adams and John Jay. And interesting, of course, John Jay had worked with Hamilton on the Federalist Papers. Burr says that he has political differences with these people for many years, but that Burr has always treated them with respect. They always reciprocated, and that he has very good relations with both of them. Hamilton, despite Burr's efforts to treat him with respect, and Van Ness tells Hamilton this, Hamilton has never reciprocated, and Burr had concluded that Hamilton had, quote, a settled and implacable malevolence toward him. Hamilton does not deny it. The negotiations fail. Hamilton won't take either of the 3 options. Again, let me repeat them: apology, denial, or just saying I don't recall. Van Ness and Pendleton try, and I think I give them credit, they try very hard to get Hamilton to change his mind, because the alternative to rejecting those 3 options, the alternative is a duel. They try very hard, stressing again, Burr is not concerned about political criticism, only personal insults. Burr refuses and instructs Pendleton to receive the expected challenge. And so the 2 seconds have no choice. By now we're at the end of June. The next few days are devoted to making arrangements for the duel. The date is set for July 11th. Burr wanted it sooner, but Hamilton asked for a delay because he has court cases in the pipeline and would like to get them wrapped up. So Burr agrees. The site of Weehawken is chosen. It was a popular dueling site for several reasons. Dueling was illegal in New York State, but it was still legal in New Jersey. Weehawken is easily accessible from the city, and it has a secluded site with plenty of trees, so that on the New Jersey side of the river, somebody walking down the road can't see the dueling ground. but it has a flat plateau that's ideal for dueling. So it was a popular dueling site. Some of you may know that Hamilton's son Philip, his eldest son Philip, was killed in a duel in 1802 at this same site. Okay, so the date is set. Again, according to the rules, Burr is the challenger, Hamilton is the challenged party. So Hamilton gets the prerogative of bringing the weapons. I'd like to say talk about two interesting, important and controversial issues about the duel itself. One is the pistols themselves. They belonged to Hamilton's brother-in-law, John B. Church. And as I said, they have been used in the duel, 1801, 3 years prior, where Hamilton's son Philip was sadly killed. The pistols were fitted with secret hair triggers, okay? Let me say right off the bat, this is clearly cheating. It was not unheard of. Some gunsmiths even advertised that they would put in a hair trigger for you if you wanted one. But it's clearly against the rules of dueling and definitely cheating because it gives one side, obviously, an advantage over his opponent who knows nothing about it. The hair trigger is actually mentioned. Pendleton mentions it in his account, that he says to Hamilton just before the duel, do you want me to set the hair triggers? And Hamilton answers, quote, not this time, unquote. Most historians between the duel itself, 1804 and 1976, simply ignored this remark. But it's interesting, Pendleton does use the word hair trigger. In 1976, at the time of the bicentennial, the pistols, which were owned by what was then Chase Manhattan Bank, now JP Morgan Chase, and they still own them, the pistols were taken apart to allow accurate reproductions to be made. When the pistols were taken apart, lo and behold, the hair triggers were discovered or / confirmed. This Smithsonian magazine had an article about it at the time. Even since it's been known since 1976 that the hair triggers were in fact there, some historians have dismissed it as not important. We simply don't. I think it is important. We simply don't know if the triggers were set or not. Now, let me explain a little bit. Dueling pistols required a lot of pressure, pull the trigger, a lot of pressure. Figure I read was 10 to 12 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger. That's a lot. Some years ago, I actually got to fire a set of replicas where the trigger's set and where it's unset. And believe me, there's a huge difference. It takes a lot of effort to pull that trigger. But with the hair trigger set, you just brush your finger against the trigger and it will go off. But again, let me say, we don't know whether the triggers were set or not. Or if one was, who got it. It's pretty sure that if they were set, the pistol Burr used was not, because if you didn't know the hair trigger was set, your shot would go off very prematurely, and we know that wasn't the case. Whether Hamilton's was set or not, or if it was it intentional or was it accidental? We simply don't know. Some people think Hamilton's shot did go off prematurely, but that's no proof in and of itself. Okay. The point I want to make about this, whether they were set or not, it's cheating. And it's and some of you may remember years ago with the famous pine tar incident with the Yankees versus the Royals, when George Brett used a rigged bat, and what a set to that was. This is sort of similar. Okay. The second controversial aspect about the duel, and which is also, I'm going to say it, an egregious case of cheating, is the letter Hamilton writes, composed over several days. So again, he gave a lot of thought to it. Hamilton leaves a letter behind to be opened in case of my death. Many people over the years, Hamilton partisans, as well as many historians and biographers, simply take it at face value and believe everything Hamilton said was true. Several things to keep in mind here. If Hamilton had lived, they'd walked off the dueling field, shook hands, gone home, Hamilton would simply have destroyed this letter, threw it in the fire, and no one would be the wiser. I see it as in case Hamilton is killed, it's his attempt to destroy Burr from beyond the grave. Okay. In this letter, now, of course, Hamilton was killed. We all know that. And so the letter is open, and in fact, it's given to the press. Hamilton, in this letter, it's a strange letter. Hamilton makes two astonishing claims. One, he says that he's opposed to dueling because it's unchristian, and he has had a late in life conversion to Christianity, from being a nominal Christian or maybe even a skeptic. He says he's just become a Christian, but he's going to do it anyway. Why? Well, he says he lets it all hang out here. He says he can't deny what he said about Burr because it's true. He did say it. So if he denied it, he would be lying. He also says he can't apologize because, guess what? He's not sorry. He meant everything he ever said about Aaron Burr. So he says he has no choice. Honor requires that he accept the challenge. And again, let me reiterate, it's still not too late. Right up until shots are fired, he still has the option of saying, wait, I think better of it, I'm sorry. Okay. The second thing he says, also very controversial, that he says in this letter, is that he is going to throw away his first shot. Now, those of you who saw the musical may recall that this line, don't throw away your shot, is used over and over again in the musical in a number of different ways. This, in terms of doing this in a duel, there was even a name for it, a French term. It was called deloping, from the French for throw away, going to throw away your shot. And again, I want to stress, deloping was specifically forbidden in the dueling code. It was considered unethical, ungentlemanly, and highly frowned upon, especially as in this case, and most people, not that it was real common, but there are other historical instances of it, you don't let the other party know. Okay, why is this so frowned upon? Well, because the person doing it, doing the deloping, is claiming the moral high ground for himself and making the opponent look like a villain. If I'm shot, it's not on me, it's on him. He killed me in cold blood. But if your opponent has no knowledge of that you're going to do this, or are threatening to do it, again, that's considered highly unethical. Dueling itself, as repugnant as it may seem, and obviously a violent solution, remember, it's a way of settling a dispute. And dueling itself was not considered legitimate unless both parties are willing to share equally in the risk. I would also add the proper way, even though eloping's forbidden, the proper way to do it is fire your pistol into the ground, not fire it in the air or fire it off to the side, fire it into the ground. Hamilton does not, there are questions about, you know, his when and where he fired, but he did not fire into the ground. So whether he really was going to delope or not, no one knows. But saying it was a huge violation, not only of the dueling code, but of the code of gentlemen. You don't do that. In fact, Hamilton tells his second Pendleton, as well as another friend, a Federalist politician named Rufus King, former New York senator, that he's going to do this, that he's going to throw away his shot, and that he's going to put it in his letter. Pendleton and King are horrified by this. They beg him not to do it, not only not to do it, but not put it in the letter. They both try to talk him out of it, but fail. Now, I should also say, because I used the phrase first shot. In the letter, Hamilton says he's going to throw away his first shot. Dueling actually allowed for 2 shots, with the thought that if no one is hit in the first round, there's still time for an apology. Most duels never used the second shot. But Hamilton says he's going to throw away his first shot in the hopes that Burr will think better of continuing. Okay. All right. So the duel itself, I'm just going to say a little bit about that. The distance was 10 paces, about 30 feet. There are only 2 eyewitnesses to the duel itself, Van Ness and Pendleton. Everybody else is hidden. Who else is there? Well, there's a doctor. Doctor comes with Hamilton. And of course, there are the oarsmen. The 2, Hamilton and Burr come separately with their seconds. The oarsmen who rowed them, rowed, R-O-W-E-D, rowed them across the river. They were told, as was standard dueling practice, hide in the bushes and do not look at what's going to happen. The reason for that was actually for their own protection, that in case there is a fatality and a coroner's inquest, they can give testimony and say they did not see it, and not be perjuring themselves. So it's for their own legal protection. So they are told to hide in the trees and not look. Okay. Burr and Pendleton's, Van Ness and Pendleton's accounts, as I say, are in agreement. The only thing they differ on is who shot first. For myself, I actually consider this not really worth the time that many historians have given to it. They shoot within a couple seconds of each other, and that's, you know, we have to make the best of that. But let me just give you quickly, as long as we do have a little time. I'm doing better than I thought time-wise. Van Ness claims that Hamilton fired first, and the reason he believes that is because when Burr was about to fire, just before he fired, he did flinch, and Van Ness actually thought he had been hit. He hadn't, as Burr turned around, his foot hit a stone, and it was the stone under his foot that caused him to flinch. Van Ness, Pendleton says that Burr fired first. Hamilton's shot did hit a tree limb and severed it. Pendleton even came back the next day to retrieve the tree limb. Pendleton thought, he didn't say it for a fact, he thought that Burr shot first because Hamilton fired involuntarily when the bullet hit him. Again, we don't know. We don't know who fired first, and I don't even think, to be honest, I don't think it's important. We know what the result was. Did Hamilton delope? Again, impossible to say. His pistol was fired, and he did not fire into the ground. arguing against the fact that Hamilton was going to throw away his shot is the fact that, and both seconds agreed with this, Pendleton did not dispute Van Ness. Prior to firing, Hamilton had taken out his eyeglasses and was trying and was sort of like, sighting the pistol in terms of sun glare. It's early in the morning, it's between 6 and 7 a.m. And there were coin toss. Pendleton had won the coin toss for who gets to pick the spot where he's going to stand. Pendleton and Hamilton won the coin toss, and so Hamilton's trying to pick out a good spot, and he's worried about sun glare. This doesn't indicate a person who's going to throw away his shot. Anyway, we know the call to present, that word for fire, is given, and Burr's bullet does hit Hamilton. Let me also say, which I neglected to say earlier, dueling pistols are very inaccurate and unreliable. Even if you intended to kill somebody, there's no guarantee you would. Remember, they're handmade. They're not mass produced. They're handmade for you by a gunsmith, and they all dueling pistols have their own idiosyncrasies. And there's no guarantee what they're going to do when you fire them. And of course, we have the hair trigger issue as well, which I'll leave that for now. I don't believe Burr meant to hit Hamilton at all. We have two quotes from Van Ness, or things Van Ness reports. When Hamilton's hit, Burr's immediate reaction is to run toward him, but Van Ness pulls him away and says they have to leave. Van Ness is worried that the doctor Van Ness doesn't want the doctor to be able to identify Burr if it comes to that, comes to a legal proceeding. So Van Ness hurries him away. When they get to their boat, Burr says to Van Ness, he tries to go back. He says, I must go and speak to him. Van Ness says, absolutely not, it's out of the question, we have to go back. We know from the Pendleton and the doctor's testimony that when the doctor comes to Hamilton, Hamilton says to him, this is a fatal wound, doctor. Some accounts say this is a mortal wound. But Hamilton does not die immediately. They row back to New York. They take him to a friend's house, which is right near where they picked up the boat. And Hamilton lingers in terrible pain, unfortunately, till the next day. Burr does try to get information. Burr goes to his home. He tries to get information on Hamilton's condition. He even sends a message to the doctor inquiring, quote, about the present state of General Hamilton and of the hopes which are entertained of his recovery. He never receives any answer. And of course, Hamilton dies the next day. I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Let me conclude, just say two things. There are two mysteries about this duel. One is the origin of Hamilton's hatred of Burr. And again, many contemporaries speculated about that. Many historians and biographers have speculated about that. No one really knows, but it was whatever it was far beyond political differences. And also contemporaries knew, many would say, that Burr never said anything against Hamilton that would have warranted this or done anything to him. So really no one knows what the origin of that hatred was. I use the adjectives irrational and obsessive, and I'm willing to stick with those. The other question, and again, we don't know why, is why doesn't Hamilton end this right away? I want to repeat, all Burr wants is an apology or a denial. And he'll even take, I don't recall. But Hamilton will not give in on this issue at all. And so, it winds up the way it does. So, okay. I'll be happy to take it. Any questions?
Do we have any questions? We do have some comments. Oh, wait a minute. I do have questions here. Was Burr, in fact, actually a despicable person? If dueling was legal in New Jersey, why were they so concerned with having no witnesses to the shooting? That's the first question.
Okay, that's several questions, but okay. No, I don't think Burr was despicable at all. And many contemporaries, even political rivals, said that he was an easy person to get along with and a nice person to deal with. Many political opponents like him. In fact, I would say, it's something we hear about all the time today, that they talk about the ability to work across the aisle. Back in the 1790s, when his political career is really in its heyday, and into the early 1800s, his term as vice president, Burr is known for being willing to work across the aisle. And so I'm saying no. I don't think Burr in any way is despicable. What was the other question? I'm sorry. That's
legality. If the dueling was legal in New Jersey, why were they so worried about witnesses?
Oh, okay. Because even though the duel occurs in New Jersey, because the challenge had been issued and accepted in New York. And as it turns out, now at the moment of the duel, obviously they don't know that Hamilton's going to die, but that's always as a possibility, even remote, it's in the back of people's minds. And these are New Yorkers. And as it turns out, Hamilton, even though the bullet hits him in New Jersey, Hamilton dies in New York. And so there will be a coroner's inquest and there will be a grand jury hearing. So they're concerned about that the New York authorities, will have legal proceedings, call witnesses, put them under oath, etc. That's my understanding of why they're concerned anyway.
Okay. We have another, I guess, comment and question. Excellent presentation, Dr. Bowles. Do you think the fact that Hamilton's shot went astray is consistent with the hair trigger having been set?
Obviously one couldn't prove it, but I would, and I don't know, but I would say that's definitely a possibility. Again, it could have been set, and if it was set, was it set by accident and Hamilton didn't know, or was it set on purpose? Someone once explained it to me. When you're in the position to fire a dueling pistol, they hold. Oops, my lamp here. You hold the pistol up in the air and you bring it down as you turn around to face the person. But because a normal dueling pistol requires such pressure on the trigger, the duelist starts pulling on the trigger while it's still in the air. Right. It is. I do say it as a possibility. It is possible that it was set by accident and Hamilton didn't know it. And starting to pull on the trigger, with the hair trigger set, it definitely would go off prematurely. So I'll say that is a possibility. But again, we'll never know, and we can't prove it.
If you were just asking.
Hi, Dr. Bowles. Someone has a question. Given that Alexander Hamilton goes down as one of the all-time greats in early American history, what would be your point of view on the fact that he was killed in a duel and martyred? To what degree do you think that had on his standing in American history?
that's excuse me. That's interesting that you do the that you use the word martyr. And I'll speak for myself here. I actually am not anti-Hamilton, except as it involves Aaron Burr. I give full marks to Hamilton as a financial genius who gets the country off on a good financial footing when it was on under the Articles of Confederation. It was on the verge of chaos and literally had no money. So I give Hamilton full marks for that. I give Hamilton full marks for the ones he wrote of the Federalist Papers and championing the Constitution. In terms of the word martyr, I personally don't think he was a martyr. I think Sam was that he died and in such a painful way. It's really his own fault. So I don't want to say, that sounds harsh. I'm sorry. I think it was his own fault. But he does become a martyr. There's a big funeral procession through New York, the streets of New York, a eulogy that's very emotional, and to Hamilton's friends and family. And Hamilton's wife lives a long time later. I forget how many, several decades later. I forget how long she lives, but she lives to quite an old age. And her goal in life is to preserve his reputation and keep that martyr image. So, yeah. And of course, as I mentioned, the publishing of thank you. My cousin Sherry Burr put up a note here. She lives another 50 years. Thank you, Sherry. The letter to be opened in case I die, that's published in the newspaper, and everybody takes it at face value. Oh, what a great guy. And he was going to throw away his shot and blah, blah, blah. It all goes to the martyr image. So that's the best way I'd answer your question.
Here's another question. Is it known whether when Aaron Burr held the dueling pistol, he could have felt the presence of the hair trigger device?
No, it was secret. These were so cleverly done that there would be no way by looking at the pistol or even feeling it that the hair trigger was there or was set. If it was set, the only way you'd know is if your pistol goes off prematurely.
What happened with the coroner's inquest? I'm reading on.
Oh yeah, I did see somebody ask that in the box. Yeah, there is a coroner's inquest and there is a grand jury. Excuse me, kind of interesting. But the feeling against Burr in the city within a few days of Hamilton's death has become so anti-Burr that his friends advise him to leave town because he might even be indicted for murder. And so he does leave town. He goes to Philadelphia for a while. And then, in fact, he is indicted for murder in both New York and New Jersey. These murder charges are very quietly dropped later. No legal authority of the time viewed dueling as murder. Okay. In terms of the coroner's inquest, though, interestingly, Van Ness leaves town, so he doesn't have to testify. And Pendleton shows up, but pleads what then would be fairly new. He pleads the Fifth Amendment, and he's dismissed. So Van Ness and Pendleton never do, as I say, their accounts are in the paper, but they never do testify under oath. But they were, why? Well, they were worried that they would be blamed too, because by enabling the duel, participating in it, they were all indicted. Burr in absentia, Van Ness and Pendleton were all indicted for engaging in a duel, which was a felony in New York. And interestingly, they were the punishment for this was supposed to be disenfranchisement, and because they were all lawyers, being disbarred for 20 years. But it doesn't appear that this was ever enforced. But yeah, they were charged with felony. Okay. Yeah, other questions or comments?
Hamilton's son died in a duel 2 years prior.
Yeah.
Have any of the contemporary accounts explored the possibility that Hamilton was choosing a way out of this world in the same manner in which his son Philip had died, and
Oh,
using
great
her as a
question.
scapegoat?
Great question, Jane. And yeah, sometime there have been thoughts that Hamilton's stricken with guilt, and or is trying to commit suicide. He's also deeply in debt, but his eldest son is dead. The eldest daughter, because of the brother's death, kind of has what I guess we'd call a nervous breakdown, and is never, mentally right the rest of her life. And there are, did I mention what, the 7 living children, the youngest being only 2 years old. But that theory was bandied about the suicide theory. In the early 1970s, there was a professor of either psychology, I think he was a psychiatrist, I'm not sure. He was a professor at Adelphi, I think. His name was J. Lee Schneidman. And he had published an article in a psychological journal, I think, very detailed elaboration of his theory that that this was an elaborate suicide attempt. I don't know. It got a lot of play at the time, but it's kind of forgotten now. I'm not a big believer in trying to psychoanalyze people who are long dead. We often assume they have the same assumptions we do, and they don't necessarily. So to answer your question, Jane, I'll say that was bandied about. That theory was bandied about, probably even by contemporaries too, who were horrified by his letter. But we just don't know. But that's a theory that's out there. So I hope that answers your question, Jane. But definitely he's guilt stricken. I don't, it said his wife blamed Alexander for Philip's death. So I mean, there's just a lot of weird dynamics going on there. Understandably weird, but weird dynamics going on there in the Hamilton family.
Most thorough analysis of the duel I have heard or read. I have personally discussed some of the points you brought up with other distinguished historians, such as Ron Chernow. He was implacable in changing his mind.
Yeah, right. Right. Chernow wrote the biography of Hamilton that gave Lin-Manuel Miranda his inspiration to write the musical. But it's absolutely, understandably, he's a pro-Hamilton biographer, but very anti-Burr. That's for sure.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Comments? Well, I enjoyed this very much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And well done.
Well, thank you, Deborah, for inviting me, and thank everybody. I mean, I had a lot of friends here, which I really appreciate your coming.
Yes.
So thank you for everybody for your kind attention and your kind remarks.